everyone at works together each week to create opportunities for us to worship together and to be together in community. Our board, our worship committee, our technical support team, those of us who help us in feeding the homeless, and to everyone who helps to prepare each week for our Sunday morning worship services and other events, such as our weekly Zoom at noon discussion group. We also know that there are always more opportunities to work together and more to be done. So if you're looking for a way to become more involved, please reach out. For those of you who are new to our community, please connect with us after the service if you would like to be added to our email list so that you can receive advance notice of each service and other upcoming events. Connecting with each other is the way in which we build community as a strong base from which we can go out and make a difference in the world. I think there's a slide that's going to be put up with information about upcoming services. On December 11th, Don West Jr. Will be giving the service. On December 18th, Reverend James Ford will be having a service with regard to Hanukkah. On December 25th, Christmas Day, at our regular hour, 10:45, we'll be having a get-together, not a regular service, but the building will be open. And as Pam says, bring a story, bring a song, bring something to share, or just bring yourselves. It's a great time to be together. Our service on January 1st, I think, is still to be determined. The announcements that we have, other than our own services, on Christmas Eve at 5:30, there'll be a Christmas Eve service at Tapestry in Lake Forest. That's not here, that's at Tapestry. But they specifically invited all of the members of the congregation and friends from UUFLB. They do require proof of COVID vaccination and masks if you haven't previously attended. Don't forget, there will be a congregational meeting immediately following this service to consider and vote on proposed amendments to the UUFLB bylaws. There's not going to be any other business at that meeting, so it should be a very short but important meeting. So be sure to stay around for it. Our centering thought this morning is adapted from words by the Reverend Laura Lynn Bellamy. I think the words will be on the screen. I invite you, if you wish, to read these words together with me, to unmute yourselves if you've joined us this morning on Zoom. If here you find freedom, take it with you into the world. If you find comfort, go and share it with others. If you dream dreams, help one another that they may come true. If you grow love, give some back to a bruised and hurting world. Our opening hymn this morning is number 38 in the gray hymnal. Morning has broken. For those of you who are joining us by Zoom, the words will be in the chat and they will also be on the screen. Please stand if you wish, if you're here, and join with Sue and the rest of us as we sing hymn number 38, Morning Has Broken. Melody.
Morning has broken like the first morning. Blackbird has spoken like the first bird. Praise for the singing, praise for the morning. am springing fresh from the word. Sweet rains the new fall, sunlit from heaven, like the first dew fall on the first grass. Praise for the sweetness of the wet garden, mine incompleteness where his feet pass. Mine is the sunlight, mine is the morning, born of the one light Eden saw play. Praise with elation, praise every morning, God's recreation of the new day.
Let us take a moment to remind ourselves why we come together as a community. I invite you to read these words together when and if it feels right for you. If you are on Zoom, please unmute your microphone so that we can feel the power when we join our voices together. The words of the unison affirmation will be on your screens. Please join me in reading. Love is the spirit
of this fellowship.
In service of this law.
This is
our great covenant.
Dwell
together in peace.
Seek
To
the
seek
truth
the
and
truth
love,
Truth and love.
to help
to
one
help
another.
one another.
Our reading this morning will be by our guest speaker, Lawrence Ingalls. Lawrence?
Just a quick update. I started at the Orange Coast Church, but I'm married to the Fullerton minister, so I've been there for a few years. Totally inappropriate for me to handle money or be on the board or all the things I did at Orange Coast. So if you want a good get out of jail free card for that kind of work, marry the minister and you're set. So the reading is a short story that I have for you today. It's a true story. It's relevant to the sermon. So I know somebody who comes from a family where there is an extreme risk for breast cancer. So this person decided to have a double mastectomy in the complete absence of a cancer diagnosis.
Oh my.
There was no danger of breast cancer at all. Some people think that that's an extreme. I'm one of them. I think that's pretty extreme. But whatever anybody's opinion on the subject, this person had bodily autonomy, and it was their decision to make. Because we're all individual human beings and not assembly line identical widgets, you can never know enough about someone and their personal history to know what drives their decisions on any subject. And an intimate medical decision like having a double mastectomy is not something anyone does on a whim. It's their decision to make, and they have their reasons for it, whatever our opinions are about their reasons and their decisions. And should we have an opinion on that kind of thing, something we can't possibly know all the details about because we're not that person? Maybe if you, medically checked out, is perfectly healthy, you might not have a double mastectomy, even if there were an extreme breast cancer risk in your family. But then that would be your set of life experience and your decision-making, right? I don't know what you've all been imagining the last minute or so that I've been talking, but I want you to know that I'm the person who had the double mastectomy. No kidding. A few years ago, I developed breast tissue in my chest. I just thought I was getting older and kind of flabby, which happens. But I mentioned it at a routine doctor's visit, and she said, "Let me see." And she examined me and she said, "Oh, diet and exercise are not going to take care of this. You actually have quite a lot of breast tissue here." I said, "What?" She said, yeah, it's not actually that uncommon, and it's usually just a cosmetic concern, unless you have a history of breast cancer in your family. I said, well, my mom, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, and each of their sisters all had or died from breast cancer, but I'm a guy, so how concerning is that? She said, that's pretty concerning with that kind of family history. You might want to consider having that removed. Think of it this way. Breast cancer is tissue growing in this area where it shouldn't, and you have a lot of tissue growing in this area where it should not. I went and had a consultation with a surgeon who said almost word for word what my doctor said, but I put off the surgery because surgery scares me. There's always the risk of infection, even with simple surgeries, which this was not. And then the pandemic hit. And that decision was taken out of my hands for quite some time. And all that while, the breast tissue continued to grow and to grow. Eventually, I was vaccinated, and I had what's called a skin-preserving double mastectomy, all of it cancer-free. So for a man, my chest looks pretty normal because most of the exterior tissue was left untouched. I then found out after having the surgery that one of my mother's male cousins had also had breast cancer, like so many of the women in my family, and it just felt like confirmation of my extreme decision. Breast cancer maimed my aunt and my grandmother, and it killed my mom and her grandmother. So I was scared. But my decision to go ahead with this surgery was equal parts to mitigate the cancer risk, but also for aesthetic reasons. I did not like having breasts. It was weird. So let's stop beating around the bush and use the A word here, because I think a lot of you can figure out what medical procedure I'm alluding to with this personal history of mine. In my congregation, the daughter of one of our congregants just coincidentally happens to be the COO of the second largest Planned Parenthood in the entire country. So we spent some time talking. And the medical procedure for an ectopic pregnancy is abortion. The medical procedure for a septic uterus is abortion. The medical procedure for a miscarriage that your body will just not release is abortion. And if you don't get that procedure, you can die gruesomely. The day it was announced that Roe versus Wade was overturned, I expected it because of the leak. But I was talking to my mom, who's in spirit, and I was writing a Facebook post about her, and I suddenly started to cry uncontrollably. And I told my husband, who was sitting next to me, you know, all of a sudden, it's like I'm 10 years old again, and I'm shouting at one of my uncles, "You can't talk to my mom like that. You get out of our house." I was so outraged and indignant. My logical mind and my common sense tells me that that announcement was worse for women than it was for me. But I want women to know that for millions of men, that announcement was viscerally ugly, and we are on your side. 12 years ago, breast cancer killed my mom, gruesomely. Her name was Natalia Erlinda Fuentes, and she was pressured by society, and she was pressured by her family about some of her medical decisions in her lifetime, but they were her decisions to make. I will not pass out of this life myself without doing what I can to make sure that people like her can make their own damn medical decisions. But in my opinion, women don't need to hear about this nearly as much as men do. And a prerequisite for men hearing about these kinds of things is that they be here in the room, or at least maybe logged in on Zoom. And I just don't see a lot of men, percentage-wise, in liberal gatherings anymore. And that's actually what I want to talk about today.
Thank you, Lawrence. We have now come to the time of our service to briefly share the important events that have touched our lives in the past week. Our joys, when shared, are magnified. And in sharing our sorrows, we provide the support and care that are vital to all of us in the community. As that it is possible to do both well. Our fellowship depends on the love and generous contributions from our members. We are empowered by the innumerable gifts of those who join in covenant with us: time, compassion, humor, and financial contribution. And all of our gifts, generously given, are needed for this fellowship for its continued good work in the world. During this time of offering, Candy will pass a basket within the fellowship. The information on your screen which is also included in the email announcement of each service, also provides 2 additional ways in which you can give, either electronically or by sending a check to the fellowship. Please join us now, standing and forming a circle as you are able, saying to each other words of sincere gratitude. From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live. Oh, I'm sorry, we're still giving. We got so much money, we're still collecting it. Hey, great, great.
One time through and then. From you I
receive, to you I give,
together we share, and
and
from
from
this
this we live.
I would like to share a meditation which was first delivered at the UUA General Assembly in 2013 by Hope Johnson, a UU elder in several of the eastern and southern UUA districts, specializing in conflict resolution. It is entitled, "We Are One." During this meditation, you may wish to relax, to close your eyes, take a deep breath, rest your hands in your lap, and feel your feet firmly connected to the ground beneath you.
I was trying to make it bigger and I made it disappear.
We are one, a diverse group of proudly kindred spirits, here not by coincidence, but because we choose to journey together. We are active and proactive. We care deeply. We live our lives as best we can. We are one, working, eating, laughing, playing, singing, storytelling, sharing and rejoicing, getting to know each other, taking risks, opening up, questioning, seeking, searching, trying to understand, struggling, making mistakes, paying attention, asking questions, listening, living our answers, learning to love our neighbors, learning to love ourselves, apologizing and forgiving with humility, and being forgiven with grace, creating the beloved community together. We are one.
Yeah. We started on. Oh, is there a video on? Oh, no. Okay.
As I mentioned earlier, the topic of our guest speaker this morning, the effects of patrimony or patriarchy on all of us, including boys and men, promises to touch on many of our central core UU values. It is with great pleasure indeed that I welcome back our guest speaker, Lawrence Ingalls.
Thank you. I should have said that the Joys and Sorrows a couple of days ago would have been my mom's 88th birthday, and we're all missing her right now. So, yeah, so that's that. Patriarchy is defined as a system of society or government in which men hold the power and women are largely excluded from it. An obvious example of patriarchy would be 100% of US presidents over the last 230 something years being 100% men. Expectations around gender roles are so deeply ingrained in our society that most people don't even see patriarchy in them. When I was in junior high school, which for me was grades 7 and 8 in rural Arizona, everybody was required to take either wood shop or metal shop, and everybody was required to take either cooking or sewing. So we all did, because those were the rules. But girls who took metal shop or wood shop and were good at it and boys who took cooking or sewing and were good at it. We were teased by the other students in those same classes, but more importantly, we were also teased by some of the teachers, not the ones who taught those classes, other teachers on campus. Girls were told things like, metal shop, that's going to be so useful when you're an adult. Boys were sarcastically asked things like, you learn how to make yourself a pretty dress yet? These were women and men, school teachers, teasing 12-year-old children. At the root of patriarchy is the belief that it's better to be a boy or a man than to be a girl or a woman. And the aggravating thing about it for me is that it's a self-perpetuating belief. The more patriarchal systems you have, the better it is to be a boy or a man. So it proves itself. I'm convinced that expectations around gender roles had a lot to do with the decades-long battle to legalize same-sex marriage in this country. My husband and I have literally spent most of our adult lives working to legalize same-sex marriage. Most of that work was calling and writing to politicians. It was writing letters to editors that were exactly 200 words long, because that's what most of them were looking to publish. And occasionally it was marching in the streets. An acquaintance of mine named Evan Wolfson is the attorney who argued the same-sex marriage case before the US Supreme Court, and he won back in 2015, which means I'm now legally married in all 50 states. God bless Evan. He argued several such legal cases in the decades leading up to that, which is how I got to know him. But that was the big one, right? Way back in the early to mid 1990s, Evan and I each got 200-word letters published side by side in the Wall Street Journal. And they were the only two letters published that day, and because it was the Wall Street Journal and my letter was right there next to Evan's, it was like a big day for me. I'm telling you part of my life story today from my perspective as a gay Latino, to highlight an issue that troubles me. As much as patriarchy is finally being recognized as one of the major underlying problems in our society today, heavily influencing most everyone's expectations around gender roles, the people who I see getting blamed for patriarchy are men, and even boys. Men benefit from patriarchy, but it is perpetuated by women and men. In the 1990s, around the time that Evan Wolfson and I got our letters published in the Wall Street Journal, I saw this woman interviewed on national television about her position against legal same-sex marriage. She laughed, and with a big smile on her face, she said, I happen to think that women should marry men. That's how it's been for most of our country's history. That's how it's been for most of human history. I happen to have a very traditional view of marriage. That woman was Hillary Clinton, and she did not endorse legal same-sex marriage until just before announcing she was running for president a second time in the 2016 election. I know a lot of you do not like to be reminded of that, but working to legalize same-sex marriage consumed gigantic amounts of my free time for most of my life until very recently. We need men. We need all kinds of men if we're going to change the course of patriarchy. I'm troubled by how few men I see in liberal gatherings of all kinds. I honestly don't know how much of my personal experience stems from the era that I grew up in, and how much of it stems from having grown up in a Latino family. But in my personal experience, patriarchy has been perpetuated more by women than by men. That could be a Latino thing, although it is white women and Latinas that I'm thinking about as I say that. When I was a child, I played with dolls. Everybody called them action figures, but they were dolls. I was also a very effeminate, very articulate little boy. It was obvious to a lot of people that I was probably gay. Not so much to me yet, I hadn't clued in, but other people knew. And it was women. It was always women, never ever men, who said to my mom things like, Natalie, boys don't talk like that. Boys don't stand like that. Boys like baseball, not cooking. Boys don't walk like that. He should be playing basketball, not imitating Liza Minnelli in Cabaret. You are ruining that boy. I literally could not count how many times I heard women say to my mother in front of me, you are ruining that boy. You are going to ruin that boy. He doesn't know how to be a boy. Natalie, what is wrong with you? Why does he know how to do that? Meaning use a washing machine, use a stove, use a vacuum. You're going to be so sorry when that kid grows up. Did you hear what he just said? What kind of boy talks like that? Men never seem to notice. And if they did notice, they just didn't care. But women noticed, and women disapproved. I have to say white women were much more tactful and polite than other Latinas like my mom, but they were equally disapproving. I know I'm talking to a fairly liberal audience this morning, so let me just sadly inform you that today in 2022, I personally know two mothers, and I know of a few more mothers who will not let their sons play a harp or a clarinet because those are instruments for girls. I have several friends who are music teachers, mostly harp teachers. And when the little girls that they teach have brothers who also want to play the harp, some of their moms won't let them. The teachers know the families. It's the moms, not the dads, who will not let their sons play a harp. From my perspective, the implication is that these are instruments for girls or faggy little boys, like I used to be. And that's today in 2022. Can you imagine what it was like decades ago when I was growing up? The boys of decades ago are the men of today, the voters of today, the people we need if we are to alter the course of patriarchy. I want to give you one specific example from my life, one incident out of numerous incidents to illustrate how this played out in my formative years. My freshman year of high school, so I was about 14 years old, I was having lunch with my mom and my baby cousin, who my mother was babysitting that day. It was a weekend afternoon, and this white woman who my mother worked with stopped by our apartment to either to drop off something or pick up something, and my mom invited her in. The moment this woman saw me, she looked at me kind of sideways. She seemed taken aback. She actually walked toward the table where I was sitting at like this sideways defensive angle. She sat down opposite me, obviously uncomfortable. And as soon as she was seated, her eyes started darting back and forth between me and my mom. Misreading the situation, my mother said, "It's okay, we're just finishing up. You're not interrupting anything. Would you like some coffee?" And very tentatively, this woman said, "All right." And then again, her eyes started darting back and forth between me and my mom. My mom gave her the coffee. She sat down at the table herself. And you could feel the tension building in the room as my mother pushed the cream and sugar toward this coworker of hers. Never a very patient person, my mother reached over, she patted her coworker's arm and she said, "What's wrong, honey? You seem kind of uncomfortable." And very embarrassed, this woman looked down at her lap and she said, "I'm sorry, boys just don't do that." I said, "What am I doing?" She said, "That, all that." And then turning to my mother with a tone of voice that clearly said, "Are you out of your mind?" She said to my mom, "Boys don't do any of that." What I was doing while I was sitting there eating my lunch was holding my baby cousin in my lap and also feeding her. She'd recently switched to those little jars of mushy baby food, and I was feeding her with this tiny little spoon in between taking bites of whatever it was I was eating myself. We were having lunch together. I know now that what bothered this woman was not just that I was taking care of and feeding a baby. I was doing it really well. It was clearly something I routinely did. I was good at it, and that freaked her out. But in that moment, I didn't have the clarity that I do now. So I just said, "Do you mean feeding Bianca?" Which is my cousin's name. She said, feeding her, holding her, all that kissing and snuggling, taking care of a baby. Boys just don't do that. I was still too young to have clued in about my own sexuality and to have any recognition of larger societal issues like patriarchy. So sincerely laughing a little bit, I waved the tiny spoon at her and I said, "Well, clearly we do." And again, very embarrassed, she looked down and she said, "No, they really don't." And then she abruptly got up and she excused herself and she left. She didn't leave in a huff. She wasn't angry. She was super uncomfortable and embarrassed. All of this was not like a daily experience I had growing up with women that knew my mom, but it was by no means a one-off. It was not really that unusual. And we had just met. This woman didn't know me. She barely knew my mother. This was her first and her last time in our home. But still, she felt strongly motivated to express her opinions because this is how it was when my generation was growing up. I was the odd one in that situation, in that time period, not her. I do a lot of community theater, which means I have a lot of interactions with people in their 20s and 30s. And on one show that I worked on, a young woman was teasing her boyfriend about crying during a movie that they had seen. They both ironically said, "Boys don't cry," and they laughed at that. And I kind of cringed and I thought, "Oh, is that what you think that means? Or is that what you think that used to mean?" When I was growing up, boys did cry, but we were not supposed to under any circumstance. When I was growing up, boys got in trouble for crying. Boys were punished for crying. I was not, but my cousins were. And a lot of the boys I went to school with were punished if they cried. At a neighbor's house one time, there was this house in the neighborhood that had 4 or 5 siblings, so all the kids played there. And one of the boys who lived there slipped and he broke his wrist. And I remember his father came outside and he bent forward. He put his face like nose to nose with this little boy and he shouted at him, "You stop crying right now." All boys were ashamed to cry when I was growing up, but you could tell when a boy was afraid because he was crying. I saw that look on my cousins' faces several times, and this 9-year-old with a broken wrist was afraid because he was crying. I know 2 men, not Latinos, if that matters, they're white. They both know me, they do not know each other. They both independently told me, and they both happen to come from the same conservative state back east, which is a weird coincidence, but they both independently told me about being shut inside bottom dresser drawers when they were little for crying. You want to cry? I'll give you something to cry about, was a super common saying when I was growing up. That was often followed by being hit, but these 2 guys, you know how some dressers, the drawers get larger the closer you get to the floor? They were shut inside bottom dresser drawers. So they were pinned there, they couldn't move at all. Sometimes they were in there for a minute, sometimes they were in there for 5 or 10 minutes. Not knowing how long they'd be shut inside the drawer was part of the punishment. Both men independently described it to me as being buried alive. I would characterize what they experienced as torture. Imagine someone doing that to you today, shutting you inside a small wooden box and leaving you in it for an indefinite period of time. That's torture. But these 2 guys had moms and dads who felt it was important for them to grow up to be real men who do not cry. This is what my generation, and especially previous generations, meant: real boys. And if you want them to grow up to be real men, do not cry at all. You all know men in their 40s or their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. For all of us, there is some amount of unprocessed early childhood trauma. And for some of us, there's a lot of unprocessed trauma. Not letting boys play the clarinet or the harp and then blaming them for it. Not letting boys and young men be caregivers for their own children or younger family members without shaming them for it and then blaming them for that situation. Patriarchy is your fault. I can't tell you how big a mistake I think it is to alienate boys and men. If you really want to change anything, that requires everyone to vote on it. I'm strongly connected to a few liberal institutions, churches, universities, theaters, and I've taken to calculating the percentage of men and boys that I see when those communities gather. And it's almost never above 25%, and it's frequently as little as 5%. Richard Rohr says, if you do not transform your pain, you will transmit it. I realize I still carry some pain. I'm still a little bit wounded from the memories of digging through a grocery store dumpster for food as a child, or of going barefoot for weeks in the summertime because I had outgrown my shoes. My mom always had to wait until the weekend before school started to buy me a new pair of shoes because they had to last the whole school year. I could be barefoot in the summer, but I wasn't allowed to be barefoot at school. I'm still a little bit angry knowing that the men that my mother worked with, who did exactly the same full-time office jobs that she did, were paid well enough that their kids had shoes. But also, if their kids were hungry, it was because dinner hadn't been made yet and not because there was no food. My ears are permanently wounded. I wear hearing aids. They're tiny little things, that's what they look like. The reason I wear hearing aids is because I got an ear infection when I was 5 years old that ran out of control because we couldn't afford to go to the doctor. Our life then was literally pay a doctor bill or buy food, so we didn't go. And the infection kept building up wax and building up wax. And then the pressure became so great that it tore my eardrums. That happened so early in life that compensating for that injury became normalized. And I didn't even realize I needed hearing aids until a few years ago. Now, when I take them out, or even when the batteries die, the energy that I have to use to focus to understand people is really pretty tiring. I carry my mom's picture with me when I do women's marches because she's not here to do it herself anymore. And the truth is somebody has to do it for her, because if my mother were still here today, she would still not be paid fairly. And there are days when that fills me with rage. Hearing loss is not my only ongoing health issue resulting from women not being paid fairly. Every single day of my life is a little bit or a lot difficult because of early childhood poverty that did not have to be. My mother was bilingual and worked full-time for Los Angeles City Hall. They could have paid her fairly. I worked for one of the world's top science research institutions, and I got my brains and my work ethic from her. If you do not transform your pain, you will transmit it. I've transformed a lot of my pain, but certainly not all of it. And like many Unitarian Universalists, I have transmitted my pain into systems intending and wanting to benefit women, but in a way that sometimes excludes men, rather than including both women and men. I'm guilty of the thing I'm complaining about today. A large part of how this comes about is the relief that I've gotten. It assuages the rage in my heart when we make a point of hiring women or voting them into elected UU offices. But making decisions that affect everybody in order to mitigate your own personal pain, that might be where the mistakes begin. At the last General Assembly I attended in person, which was a few years ago, I sat down at this big round table in some hotel lobby with a bunch of strangers, but a lot of them were wearing Standing on the Side of Love t-shirts. So I thought, my people. And there were people around this table from 2 different congregations joking and laughing about their upcoming ministerial search and how anything from male applicants were going right in the trash because all they had ever had were male ministers at their churches. It was too uncomfortable for me to speak up and say, I'm married to a male minister. But more than that, especially now and standing up here in front of all of you, I'm acutely aware that if I had been one of those applicants, automatically excluding me would also mean automatically excluding a gay, hearing impaired, Native American, Spanish-speaking Latino. And I've noticed that people who take the time to be on search committees and on search boards are often the same people who are wondering aloud, we're so welcoming. Where are all the people of color? How are we still a mostly affluent white community? How indeed. I've had to coach women friends of mine in how to do salary negotiations so that they got decent raises. I've had to coach women employees how to be more assertive, especially when they're newly promoted into supervisory positions. It is accepted as normal that women sometimes need to be taught that it's okay to be assertive. But instead of teaching men how to get along and play nice, instead of trying to take over things that are not theirs to take over, we just get rid of men. We just toss them aside. I've seen it in business. I've seen it in a UU setting. I followed those 2 churches online, the ones that were just going to set aside anything from male applicants. They both hired, as they have always hired since their foundings decades ago, white ministers. I'm convinced without even talking to them that they felt they were being progressive. Because you know what? UU does not feel progressive. If you will take the time to talk to them, you will find that women of color, like my mom, have a harder time getting hired as UU ministers than any white person. Making decisions that affect everybody in order to mitigate my own pain or even just my own discomfort. I've done it in a UU setting. I wanted to honor my mom. I wanted to try to help balance out in some tiny way the centuries of discrimination that women and some of their children have experienced. But the vast majority of times that I calculate the percentage of men in liberal gatherings of all kinds, it really is almost never above 25%. And it's frequently a lot less. And we are all needed, especially right now. I still worry that our democracy itself is at stake, and we need to engage as many people as possible. We need the ears and the hearts of more than just 25% or fewer men. And if it's not already obvious, let me just bluntly say that while I am advocating for 50% men in Unitarian Universalism, and you folks do better at that than most congregations I've been to, I'm not advocating for a return to what would have been most of UU history, which was 50% men in our congregations, but 100% of the people up here in the pulpit were only men. Hard pass on that. If we can accept as normal that some women need to be taught that it's okay to be assertive and then actually follow through and teach them that, then we can accept that some men need to be taught that it's okay to work together and get along and then actually follow through and teach them that. The kinds of moms and dads who did things like punishing their sons for crying, who shut them inside drawers so that they felt buried alive, who slapped them or beat them with wooden spoons or hairbrushes or belts because they cried, I'll give you something to cry about. To other boys like me, they were school teachers. They were aunts and uncles. They were neighbors. And in those roles, they taunted us and shamed us and humiliated us when they felt we were being girly and not being assertive enough, not taking charge, not being men at the ripe old age of 8. A lot of men who today so many of us find annoying or offensive, they were bullied or beaten or tortured into becoming that man. They are exactly what their moms and their dads and the communities that they grew up in were trying to create. Very few men my age and older had a Natalia Fuentes on their side, nurturing them as boys, teaching them how to take care of babies, and demonstrating that showing kindness and compassion to people will bring out a side of them that you will never see just by ordering them around. We need men to hear the things that are said in UU churches, and then we need them to go out and vote their conscience. But a prerequisite to all of that is that they be here in the room first, or at least maybe logged in on Zoom. Speaking now from my mom to all of you, I will close by saying, vayan ahora en paz, y que la alegría del amor los rodee donde quiera que vayan. Or as most of you would have said that, go now in peace, and may the joy of love surround you everywhere you go. Thank you so much for listening to me this morning.
Thank you very, very much, Lawrence. After the service, I said we'd be going directly into the congregational meeting, but we'll certainly have a few minutes for those. I know there's going to be some who will have a few questions and want to talk to Lawrence. So you'll have a chance to do that. Our closing hymn this morning is number 168, One More Step. The words will be on the screens. Please rise as you are comfortable and join us in singing hymn number 168, One More Step.
One more step, we will take one more step till there is peace for us and everyone. We will take one more step. One more word, we will say one more word till every word is heard by everyone. We'll take one more word. One more prayer, we will say one more prayer till every prayer is shared by everyone. We'll say one more prayer, one more song. We will sing one more song till every song is sung by everyone. Will one more song till every song is sung by everyone. We'll sing one more song.
Now is the time for us to extinguish the chalice here at UUFLB and within our homes. We extinguish this flame, but we keep its light in our hearts with its message of community, love, and justice, taking it out into the world in which we live until we are together again. And now let us stand as we are comfortable, form a circle, and join together in our closing song, Let There Be Peace on Earth.
Let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me. Let there be peace on earth, the peace that was meant to be, with God as our mother. We are family. Let us walk with each other in perfect harmony. Let peace begin with me. Let this be the moment now. With every step I take, let this be my song of love, to take each moment and live each moment in peace eternally. Let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me.
Don't forget, there will be the congregational meeting. It'll start, I'd say in about 5 minutes, so that if you care to have a brief chat with Lawrence, if you're on Zoom, I think